Mr. William Francis Mariano, who is the head of the Mobility Office in Taguig.
Hello, good afternoon po, Senator Pia Cayetano and to all representatives here in this meeting. So again, my name is Will Mariano from the Taguig Mobility Office, and I'll be just presenting the efforts of the city regarding sustainable transportation. The start of my agenda for today, today's presentation will be briefly discussing the legislations of the city on sustainable transportation, discussing how the city planned our bicycle lane network, and also to briefly go over the other cycling programs and other active transport efforts of the city of Taguig. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, we in the city of Taguig, we have two major legislations on sustainable transportation. First would be the Mobility Ordinance, which was crafted and signed back in 2019. And this ordinance created the Mobility Office of Taguig. So the Mobility Office is just in charge of conducting studies and implementing programs related to sustainable transportation, such as cycling and walking, road safety, concerns on public transportation, and traffic schemes. Additionally, we also have the Bike-Friendly Ordinance, which was signed back in 2020, and this created the Active Transport Office. So by its name, its objective is just to plan and implement programs and projects related to cycling, to walking, to skateboarding, and to personal mobility devices such as e-bikes and e-scooters. So for the bike lane network of the gigs, so the first thing that we had to find out was what kind of cyclists do we have in our city. So we conducted a survey with about 543 respondents, and about to classify themselves on what kind of cyclist do they think they are. So 7% of them mentioned that they belong to the baguhan o hindi ganong sanay, which means these are our beginners. Next would be the sanay pero nababahala minsan, and lastly would be mahusay at walang takot. And I would like to point out 2/3 of them answered that they belong to the sanay pero nababahala minsan, meaning they are comfortable with cycling along our roads, but they have a lot of concerns they want to address. So we delved deeper into that, and we found out they had 3 major concerns. Next slide, please. First would be to have a network of protected bicycle lanes all over the city. So that's the highest priority that they wanted to bring up with the city. Second would to have safe and accessible bicycle parking in all of our public spaces and office buildings, and also to have end-of-trip facilities as well. And lastly, to have a focus on education and enforcement on bike lane regulations. Next slide, please. But as a city, what did we have to consider when setting up our own network of bike lane? First, our top priority is to have separation and the allocation of safety barriers as much as possible, to expand our bicycle lane into intersections and ensure full connectivity of all of our bike lanes. And lastly, we also consider speed limits and traffic calming whenever necessary. So next slide, please. So since 2018 up until now, the city of Taguig has established over 60 kilometers worth of bicycle lanes all over the city. And about 30 kilometers of those are protected bike lanes with either traffic cones or bollards. And as you can see here, the blue line represents the current network that we have. But more importantly, I want to discuss that the city does not stop from there. So the green lines represent the planned network or the planned expansion of our bicycle lane network, which will hopefully connect every cyclist in Taguig to every corner of the city. And the tiny dots that you can see here are just the essential establishments and essential services within the city, such as public spaces, plazas, malls, groceries, schools, which we intend to put the necessary bicycle parking and end-of-trip facilities. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the sample designs that we have in the city of Taguig. So as you can see here on the left would be Cayetano Boulevard, which we have a protected 6 feet bicycle lane. For Bayani Road and Loton, we have a mixture of both. We have a protected bicycle lane and also a pop-up bike lane along Loton, which we are monitoring and continuously studying. And lastly, we have the C6 Bike Road, which is a completely separated bike lane, which our cyclists can enjoy some greenery and the view of Laguna Lake while they're passing by. Next, but aside from the cycling infrastructure, we also deal with a lot of other relative programs in order to holistically build up this active transport cycling community within the city. So first would be a lot of community engagements. Next slide, please. So in the city of Taguig, we have a Bike Taguig Facebook group, which is composed of over 24,000 members, which are cyclists and enthusiasts. And this is the place or the space wherein they voice out their concerns and comments and feedback to the city government. We also conduct face-to-face and online interviews or focus group discussions. So we can involve the cycling community in our planning phase. And lastly, we hold and celebrate events such as World Car Free Day and World Bicycle Day, and hold community rides for the entire community. Next slide, please. So we also conduct a lot of information campaigns for us to gather feedback and also to educate not just our cyclists but especially our motorists as well. And lastly, we also involve our traffic management enforcers by allocating some bicycles for them so that they will be partners of the city in regulating our bicycle lanes. And as mentioned by Sir Mats earlier, we also have a dedicated task force that we call the Bike Patrol, which their only job is to roam around our bicycle lanes to ensure that there are no obstructions and to serve as a helping hand to any cyclist that needs any help. Next slide, please. So aside from all the cycling related programs and projects that we have, the city also conducts a lot of studies to improve the overall active transport climate in the city. So we have road safety audits and walkability studies wherein our goal is just to evaluate and assess the current status of our roads and streets and recommend concrete actions to lessen the risk of accidents, to increase the perception of safety or of road safety along these streets, and also to improve the overall walkability along these roads. Next slide. So just to show you guys, we have a case study of here in Bayani Road. So our office recently conducted a walkability study along Bayani Road. And for context, for the entire 2.3 kilometer stretch of Bayani Road, there's only one formal crossing facility along this stretch. And we saw a lot of problems with that, and we engaged with our barangays in order to study this area. So next slide, please. So this is just one of the recommendations that we have. So we're planning to install more than 12 crossing facilities all over Bayani Road and accompany that with the necessary traffic calming schemes. Next slide, please. As you can see here, this is part of the bike lanes that we have in Bayani Road. But one problem that we saw here would be there are no spaces allocated for our pedestrians. So what usually happens is that our pedestrians typically walk along the bicycle lanes, which our cyclists would need to avoid and go out of our bicycle lane. So what our proposal would be to just occupy one car lane. And next slide, please. And to really address the needs of both our cyclists and our pedestrians that are usually populating this portion of Bayani Road. So all of these are just some of the efforts conducted or continuously being done by the city government of Taguig in regards to sustainable transportation. And I would just like to point out that the city of Taguig is continuous with these efforts, as we believe that sustainable transportation is the future of mobility within our city, and this is the future that we want for our constituents. That's it. So thank you very much for listening.